The Secret Science at Work by Max Freedom Long. Chapter 4. Aka, Thought Forms, Auras, and Their Measurement. The Aurameter. When the Kahunas and their people passed through India, they left there a certain amount of their lore. Or perhaps the people of India developed the same lore in part for themselves. In either case, the idea of the thought form and that a thought is a thing came to the Western world during the latter part of the last century by way of theosophy, which is based largely on a certain part of the beliefs held in India and Tibet. The concept of the thought form has been greatly changed from its Huna original. Western writers have speculated, and in India much contamination has been added to a once simple idea. One is now told, in all seriousness, that he can concentrate deeply and create by means of thought an invisible creature of mind which can be animated with life and sent to help or hinder others. The dread words black magic are whispered in this connection, and it is related that evil men and women have created evil creatures of thought, and that these have been allowed to roam uncontrolled around the invisible world and cause endless trouble. They are said to be similar to the astral shell, but to lack a conscious entity or self to animate and direct them. In some way, this astral shell is supposed to remain sufficiently alive to roam the world after the manner of the thought form creature and cause trouble in a similar way. Huna brings us back to the original concept of the Aka body, of the low self and the thought forms. A thought form is an impression molded in the invisible matter of the Aka body of the low self. A number of related impressions make up a cluster of thought forms, and such clusters record and contain the memories of complete events. No thought form creatures can be created by thinking. A thought form memory of a whole series of events cannot become the invisible body of a spirit, self, or unit of consciousness. We have already discussed the Huna belief that places the memories in storage in the Aka body of the low self rather than in the physical brain tissues. But recent medical discoveries have demonstrated that the Aka of the brain during life and consciousness interblends with the corresponding parts of the physical brain. Openings cut in the skull to bare the outer layer of the brain in the region above and behind the ears can be touched with a needle carrying a mild electric current and, without injury to the patient, can cause him to remember and even live over in vivid detail events of his past life. No evidence has been found of cellular change in the brain tissues to indicate that memories are impressed there, but it cannot be denied that the right stimulation will cause memories to be recalled. There is something there in storage that is both material and real, even if invisible and intangible. In various groups engaged in the study of psychic science during the past 100 years, much has been done experimentally to try to photograph thought forms or cause them to impress themselves on photographic film when the films were brought into contact with the head or hands of one concentrating on the thought of some object such as a cube or a globe. Some results have been obtained and recorded in records, articles, or books, but the images on film have been none too definite. Recently, our HRA research turned up an excellent physical method of proving the verity of thought forms and the Aka body or aura, A-U-R-A, as postulated by Huna. It was found that these things could be measured by the use of an instrument of an almost unknown type, which has been developed by a professional water dowser of Elsinore, California. Mr. Vern L. Cameron. This instrument is called the aurameter. And then there's a footnote here that says, a mimeographed book sponsored in 1952 in Borderland Sciences Research Associates, 3524 Adams Avenue, San Diego, 16, California. This instrument is called the aurameter. Its inventor some years ago began dowsing for water with a forked willow twig. He was working over a known underground stream, but for some reason was able to get no response whatever. Then, as he relates in his book, The Aurameter, let me spell this for you. Aurameter. Okay, so his book's called The Aurameter. I finally developed the feel of the switch and a kind of consciousness of throwing into it what I call an auric charge. The switch then began to react very powerfully, and my long years of experience as a dowser had their beginning. In his search for a better instrument than the willow fork, he invested and tested a number of devices, finally settling on two, which were simple, light, compact, very serviceable, and unique in his field. Neither of these instruments made a bit of sense in terms of modern science. Repeatedly, he demonstrated them to scientists in the hope that they would be understood or at least accepted, if for no other reason than they worked. At least they worked for persons sufficiently psychic to learn to operate them. The first instrument of the pair is something like a large jackknife with a ball weight on the end of a thin, round blade. The handle of the knife is held in the hand with the blade closed and the ball up in such a way that the blade, which is balanced so that it will barely stay up, can fall to the open position when the pull upon it from underground is slightly increased. As everyone knows, gravity is supposed not to change appreciably as one walks along a level road. But something was found by Cameron to increase it if, when walking along a level road, he happened to pass over a strong underground flow of water, for as he came above it, the delicately balanced blade and ball were pulled down, as if by way of additional gravity, the blade falling always to the open position. One of the peculiarities of the instrument was not discovered until some time after it had been put to use. This is the fact that there was a delay of from 20 to 30 seconds between the time at which the operator took the instrument in hand to begin making tests of any kinds mentioned and the time when the pull developed sufficiently to overbalance the weighted blade and make it fall. This time lag was also unscientific, but it was there just the same. The second instrument, the aurameter, is built on a different principle. In it, the weighted blade is fastened to the knife-like handle with a pivot bearing to allow it to move freely from side to side when the blade is held horizontally above the ground. Or to clarify, one might say that this knife remains open all the time, but that the blade is free to swing back and forth horizontally, just as a pendulum swings from a vertical support. The instrument must be held so that the ball is slightly tipped upward in order that the tip should be balanced. Otherwise, it will be pulled by gravity and caused to flop off to one side or the other. In many respects, the aurameter resembles a pendulum, although the latter is suspended from a cord or a thread and swings away from the vertical line instead of on the horizontal. However, the main difference is that while the two instruments just described seem to react to the presence of water as if gravity had been made as if gravity had been made to pull harder, the pendulum does not. The pendulum has to rely on the low self of the operator to sense the presence of water and to cause the pendulum to swing according to a prearranged code or convention to indicate the water. The willow or hazel twig, or even a fork of whalebone or a fork of bent wire in the hands of a good dowser, however, will be pulled downward as an underground flow of water is approached, and often with such power that if the green wood fork is gripped very tightly to prevent it from dipping, the bark will be twisted from the wood where it is gripped in the dowser's hand. Many tentative explanations have been given for this strange force which acts like gravity, but which seems to have little or nothing to do with it. Of all the explanations, the best and the simplest seems to be furnished by the ancient Huna system. In terms of Huna, we may say that the low self, once it has learned the convention to be used between itself and the middle self to indicate the finding of water, will proceed, A, to find the water under the ground by means of the sensitivity toward radiation natural to itself, and B, to cause the dip of the forked twig, or the fall of the weighted blade, or the horizontal swing of the aurameter ball. It may be explained that combined aka substance and mana, or vital force, flows into the instrument which is used, and there, under the direction of the mind of the low self, exhibits its uncanny characteristic of acting as a living, intelligent substance and force. It acts by actually pulling, or weighting down the ball of the blade, or the tip of the forked twig. The time lag, which is noted in the reaction of all these instruments, seems needed to allow the low self to cause the aka substance and mana to flow, or project from the hand to the instrument to make it ready to respond to the direction of the low self. And then it says in brackets, it is interesting in the above connection to note that Mr. Cameron spoke of throwing into it what I call an auric charge. Close bracket. The underground flow of water is located by Mr. Cameron by crossing ground back and forth while carrying the first instrument. The fall of the ball-tipped blade may indicate the presence of water, or if there is no underground water, it does not fall. But if it does, the second instrument, the aurameter, is then taken in hand, and Cameron backs off and again approaches the same spot. The aurameter, which cannot fall, swings strongly away when an approach is made to a point above an underground flow of water, as if avoiding a rising aura chimney sent up by the water. This aura from water may be large or small according to the size of the underwater stream or body. In many cases, the water is coming up from deep in the earth at the spot, and so gives a circular aura chimney. If the water is hot, the aura is usually oval in shape. Also, the radiation comes up in the form of a wedge, roughly speaking. If the water is far down, the edge of the wedge at the surface of the ground will be broader than if the water is close to the surface. Because of this, the depth of a well needed to tap the water will be determined by a test to find the width of the wedge. These shapes are determined by feeling all around them with the aurameter, which reacts away from the wall of the radiations. There is much more work. No, there is much more to this work than can be explained here, and water dowsing by trained individuals of the proper psychic gift is an established and respected practice. In many other countries, though less well known here, the Canadian and Australian governments have professional dowsers constantly at work locating water. In World War II, the success of the African campaign to rout the Germans under General Rommel hinged on whether or not the official dowsers of the British Army were able to find water to supply the troops on the march. One famous instance was that of the successful location of a fine flow of water in a valley where all former wells had been scant in flow and their water so filled with minerals as to be unfit for use. When, as a reader of the secret science behind miracles, Vern Cameron first called on me, he brought his instruments, and a study of them was begun, which was reported later in many HRA bulletins. Cameron proved to be a treasure trove of information, for in addition to experimenting with his instruments in the measurement of the aura of flowing water, he had measured the human aura as well as the aura of objects, plants, and animals. Naturally, the HRAs were extremely interested when he joined their numbers and demonstrated with ease the discoveries he had made a few years earlier. The human Aka body, or aura, or etheric double, had been studied by Dr. Kilner, Kilner, some years before this, and through a colored screen, he and his friends had been able to see it extended beyond the physical body, sometimes extending much, sometimes little, and often protruding at the center of the body to go out to meet and touch the protruding Aka body of someone greatly loved who was coming near. Mr. Cameron had found with the aurameter that the outline of the Aka body could be measured with accuracy, even if not seen. The Aka, or body aura, was like that of underground flows of water, inasmuch as it seemed to possess a force change that would push away the head of the aurameter when it was moved to the outer edge of it. By keeping the instrument moving along, up or down or sideways, just at the point where the push on the aurameter tip could be felt, the outline could be traced. Normally, the Aka protrudes only a few inches from the body, except at the shoulder blades and over the genitals, at which points the aura extends farther. Spots in the body which were not normal, as defective organs or teeth, were found to have the Aka over those parts swollen and made to protrude unusually far. Joints, as in the spine, which needed adjustment, showed aura bumps over them, which disappeared when the adjustment had been successfully made. Incidentally, Mr. Cameron made tests with his aurameter in San Diego, California, which convincingly allowed that the spirits of the dead survive and live in their Aka bodies. In brackets, the combined middle and low Aka bodies, that of the low self being far more dense, even if still invisible. Mr. Mark Probert, Probert, of San Diego, a well-known medium, has a number of spirits who come to speak through him when he is in a trance condition. On this occasion, he went into the customary trance, and a spirit spoke through his lips, carrying on a lively conversation and showing much interest in the aurameter, which was being tested. He readily agreed to stand beside the medium, while Mr. Cameron tried to locate his Aka body and trace its outline. He found it at once and outlined it with with much ease, as if it belonged to a living man. The spirit then suggested a test. He said that he would hide in the room, and that if he could be found with the aurameter, then Mr. Cameron and the others could have no idea of where he was hiding. The test would be evidential indeed. He was given a moment to hide, and the search was on. The aurameter was used to feel here and there, up to the ceiling and along the walls, back and forth across the room. In a few minutes, at the floor level, just below the edge of the large table which stood in the center of the room, the aurameter head was pushed back. It had come into contact with the aka body of the spirit. In a matter of seconds it was outlined, sitting cross-legged on the floor, his face toward the medium, his back toward Mr. Cameron. The spirit, speaking again through the medium, verified his position and explained, "I thought you would expect me to be standing in front of the boy and facing you, so I sat down to fool you and turned to face him." In this experiment, something very new and important had been added to the annals of psychical research, and Huna had been given one more proof of its correctness. And now we come to Mr. Cameron's discovery that a mental image or thought form of an object could be made, and that the aurameter could subsequently react to it as it does to the human aura. Most convincing tests were carried out in which Mr. Cameron will go out of the room while others agreed upon what the object was that was to be visualized to make a thought form of a certain shape at a certain place. Cubes, globes, vases of varying shapes, all sorts of things were visualized and were promptly found by Mr. Cameron when he returned to the room and began to feel at the designated place to locate the shape with the aurameter tip. One peculiar thing was often noted, that the visualized form, which seemed to have grown or contracted very much when found, let me read this last sentence again. One peculiar thing was often noted, that the visualized form often seemed to have grown or contracted very much when found. All right. This, however, was in accord with the beliefs of the Kahunas, who knew that the aka body could be made large so that it protruded greatly, or so small that it retreated inside the body completely. Thought forms proved to have the same quality. They could be made microscopic in size, to be stored in the thought form clusters of memories, or could be expanded to the size of things which they represented. One of the most convincing tests of the aurameter was made when a member of the group was visualizing a circle, standing on edge on a table, busied himself to visualize a square on the same spot without telling the others. Mr. Cameron came in, began testing, and paused. He tried again more carefully, and then ran around the thought form with the aurameter slowly, following with great care each curve and angle. This seems to be a circle with a square of smaller size superimposed upon it, he observed. The corners of the square stick out beyond the circle a little bit at 4 places. It was only then that the gentleman who had added the square explained what he had done. Having considered the latest proofs of the ancient belief that a thought is a thing, we can round out our mental picture of how the low self, using the 5 senses and guided by the middle self, observes what is happening and makes visible and microscopic thought form records to serve as memories of events. The middle self plays its part in this work by deciding what each event means and what its relation to other events may be, or as it is termed, rationalizing it. The memory cluster of thought forms, once it has been given a rational meaning and significance by the middle self, is stored in the low self, in the Aka body. When the middle self, for some reason, does not rationalize it before storing it away, trouble follows, as we have said. What we think or imagine is also recorded in the same way in memories, and as time passes, we accumulate a vast store of memories which are represented by thought form clusters. Insofar as our mental lives are concerned, we are what we think, and if the thinking is imperfect, or there are memories made by the low self without the proper rationalization touch of the middle self, they can cause much harm to mind and body. A very important matter, which will be discussed farther on. For the moment, however, our attention needs to be focused on the part of the thought form clusters play in telepathy, and upon the best way of teaching the low self to use telepathy. And that concludes Chapter 4. Chapter 5 is entitled Telepathic Contact Between Persons.